Harold Jacobs sat at his desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the wooden surface. His mind was elsewhere, lost in a sea of thoughts about his life and the mistakes he'd made. The heavy hum of the office faded as he stared blankly at his computer screen. The life he'd built was crumbling before his eyes, and he felt powerless to stop it. The once picture-perfect marriage with Sandra was nothing but a shattered illusion, and his world was spinning out of control. It all started with a secret, a betrayal that had destroyed everything he believed in. Sandra, his wife of 12 years, had cheated on him, and with someone he thought was a friend. The news hit him like a freight train, and the pain was suffocating. He had given his heart to her, built a life together, but now everything seemed like a cruel joke. And then there was Rebecca, the daughter he had raised as his own, who had sided with her mother. The two people he loved the most had torn his world apart, leaving him with nothing but a broken heart and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. But even in the midst of this turmoil, there was a flicker of hope, a chance for a new beginning. It came in the form of Rose, a woman he never expected to be a part of his life. A friend from his past who reappeared at just the right moment, offering him something he had longed for but had lost sight of: love, trust, and the possibility of redemption. It was late one evening when Harold's phone buzzed on his desk. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see Rose's name flashing in bold letters. After all that had happened, he hadn't expected to hear from her. "Hey, Harold. I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you wanted to grab a drink. I think we both need to talk." Harold's heart skipped a beat. Rose. He had always admired her for her strength, her warmth, and the way she could light up a room with her smile. After everything he had been through, the idea of sitting down with someone who genuinely cared for him felt like a lifeline. "Sure, I'd love to," Harold replied, his fingers shaking slightly as he typed. "How about tomorrow night?" The next evening, they met at a small, cozy bar on the edge of town. The atmosphere was dimly lit, with soft jazz music playing in the background. Harold hadn't realized how much he missed Rose's presence until he saw her walk in, looking as radiant as ever. Rose greeted him with a smile, her eyes filled with understanding. "You look different," she remarked, taking a seat across from him. "I know things have been tough, but there's something about you that feels lighter, more hopeful." Harold chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Maybe it's just the weight of the world finally lifting off my shoulders." They spent the next few hours talking, about everything and nothing. Harold shared the painful details of his failed marriage, his divorce proceedings, and his deep sense of loss. Rose listened intently, offering him comfort and understanding without judgment. For the first time in months, Harold felt truly seen. As the night wore on, Harold found himself growing closer to Rose, not just emotionally, but physically. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, and a connection they had once shared all those years ago seemed to rekindle. He didn't want the night to end, but eventually, they both had to face reality. "I don't know how to do this, Rose," Harold admitted, his voice raw with vulnerability. "I'm not the man I used to be. I've made so many mistakes, and now everything's falling apart." Rose reached across the table, gently placing her hand on his. "You don't have to be perfect, Harold. You just have to be you. I believe in you. You've always had a heart of gold, even when it didn't feel like it." Her words were like a balm to his wounded soul. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear them until that moment. For the first time in a long while, Harold believed that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for him after all. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions for Harold. He knew he had to confront the wreckage of his past before he could truly move forward. He had to finalize his divorce from Sandra and sever the toxic ties that had bound him for so long. But there was one thing he couldn't deny: his love for Rose. It was a love that had stood the test of time, and he wasn't about to let it slip away again. It was a Friday when Harold called up his lawyer, Charles, to discuss the next steps in the divorce. As they discussed the final terms, Charles mentioned something unexpected. "Harold, I have some news for you. Your grandfather's lawyer contacted me today. It seems he wants to leave you something in his will." Harold was stunned. His grandfather, Michael Williams, had been a constant presence in his life growing up, but their relationship had deteriorated when Harold's mother kept them apart. He hadn't seen or heard from his grandfather in years. "What does he want to leave me?" Harold asked. His curiosity piqued. Charles hesitated before answering. "It seems your grandfather disinherited your mother. He's leaving you a trust fund, Harold. A significant one. But there's more. He wants you to use it wisely, to build something positive, something meaningful." Harold's heart raced as the weight of the news settled in. $1 million. It was more than he had ever imagined. But what struck him the most was the message his grandfather had left. It wasn't about the money, it was about redemption. His grandfather's final words to him were filled with love, regret, and hope for a future Harold had never imagined. Harold's next task was to face Sandra one final time. Despite everything that had happened, he knew he needed closure. He didn't want to fight or argue. He just wanted to move on. They met in a sterile conference room, where Sandra sat with her lawyer, waiting for Harold to arrive. The moment he stepped inside, she looked up, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't aged well in the months since their separation, and Harold couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her. "Sandra," Harold said quietly, "I don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. If you're ready to sign the papers, I'm ready to let go." But Sandra surprised him. She stood up, her hands trembling as she asked her lawyer to leave the room. Once they were alone, Sandra took a deep breath and spoke. "I know it doesn't mean much now, Harold, but I'm truly sorry. I can't undo what I did to you and I can't fix the damage I caused. But I need you to know that I still love you. I always will." Harold was taken aback. He had never expected this. But in that moment, he realized something profound. The apology wasn't for him. It was for her. Sandra needed to find peace, and Harold, despite the hurt, was willing to give it to her. "I forgive you," he said softly, "but it's time for both of us to move on." Sandra signed the papers, tears welling in her eyes, and with that, the final chapter of their relationship was closed. With the divorce behind him and the inheritance from his grandfather in hand, Harold was ready to start fresh. But there was one thing left to do: make things right with Rose. He sat her down one evening, his heart pounding in his chest. "Rose," he began, "I know things have been complicated, but I want you to know that I'm all in. I want to build a future with you. No more lies, no more secrets." Rose smiled, her eyes sparkling with love. "Harold, I've always known you were the one. I just needed you to believe in yourself again." And so, they began their life together, slowly, carefully, but with more love and passion than either of them had ever known. Months passed, and Harold and Rose's relationship blossomed. They were married in a simple, beautiful ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. As Harold looked at Rose, he knew he had found the one person who truly understood him. But the best was yet to come. Rose became pregnant, and soon they welcomed twins into the world, Jack and Sally. Harold was overwhelmed with joy as he held his children for the first time, realizing that this was the life he had always dreamed of. Together, Harold and Rose expanded their business and created a life filled with love, success, and happiness. Harold had finally found his place in the world. A year later, Harold sat on a bench in his backyard, watching Rose play with their dog Gunter as their twins giggled nearby. Life had come full circle. Harold had gone from a man broken by betrayal to one who had rebuilt everything, not with money, but with love, trust, and the support of the people who mattered most. "I'm the luckiest man on earth," Harold thought, as he gazed at his beautiful family. And for the first time in his life, he believed it. This is Harold's story, one of heartache, redemption, and the power of love. It shows that no matter how dark the past, a new beginning is always possible. With the right people by your side and the courage to move forward, happiness is never out of reach.